There's a certain kind of connection that doesn't arrive like emotion, it arrives like recognition, yet precise, almost unsettling in the way it bypasses every normal process people rely on to understand each other. That's what this became before I even realized it was happening. And I think that's why I keep circling back to it, because nothing about it followed the structure I'm used to trusting. Most things in my life move through clear stages: observation, understanding, evaluation, distance. I notice patterns, I analyze them, and eventually I decide where they belong in relation to me. Everything has a place. Everything stays manageable that way. But you never stayed in the place I assigned to you. At first, I thought you were temporary, just another presence moving through the edges of my awareness. Another person I'd understand quickly and then place at the appropriate distance where things remain controlled, balanced, untouched by anything too real. That's how it always works, or at least it used to, because you didn't stay external for long. You became familiar too quickly. Not in the ordinary sense. Not through repetition or forced closeness or constant interaction. It was something deeper than familiarity built through time. It felt like recognition without introduction, like my mind encountered yours and skipped an entire process it normally depends on. That should made me pull away immediately. Instead, I stayed, and that alone says more than I've been willing to admit. I keep replaying the earliest moments in my head, trying to figure out exactly where the shift began. But there wasn't one defining point. No dramatic conversation, no sudden emotional breakthrough. Nothing obvious enough to explain why this settled into me the way it did. It happened gradually and instantly at the same time, which sounds impossible until you experience it. You became present in the spaces I usually keep separate from everyone else, the internal ones. The places where thought exists before language reaches it, where instinct forms before logic has time to organize it into something structured. Most people never reach that level with me, not because they aren't capable, because I don't allow it. I've spent years becoming skilled at remaining partially hidden, not dishonest, just carefully incomplete. People interact with what I choose to reveal and assume they're seeing the whole picture because they don't realize how much exists underneath restraint. That restraint protects something, not vulnerability exactly, oxycaracy, because the moment people think they fully understand you, they stop seeing you clearly. They begin replacing what's real with what's convenient for them. They reshape your complexity into something simpler, something easier to define, easier to control. I've watched it happen too many times to mistake it for connection anymore. So I learned to exist behind controlled distance, not isolation. Possession, enough closeness for interaction. Never enough for distortion. But you, you never distorted anything. That's what made this dangerous. You listened without trying to reinterpret. You noticed things without immediately assigning meaning to them. You responded to what was actually there instead of what you expected to find. And there's something profoundly disarming about being met with accuracy, especially when you've spent most of your life adapting to misunderstandings. I noticed it first in the silences. That's always where truth appears. Not in words. Words can be adjusted, refined, performed. People say things strategically all the time without even realizing they're doing it. Most conversations are constructed from habit rather than honesty. But silence? Silence reveals structure. And your silence never felt empty to me. It felt aware. Like you understood that not every meaningful thing needs to be interrupted just because it becomes quiet. Most people rush to fill silence because silence exposes them. It forces them to sit with uncertainty, with tension, with the possibility that they may not know what to do next. You never rushed. You let moments remain unfinished. And somehow that made them feel more complete. I remember noticing how differently my mind reacted to your presence compared to everyone else's. Around most people, there's always a process running in the background. A constant calibration between what I actually think and what I decide is worth expressing. With you, that process weakened, not intentionally. It simply stopped feeling necessary. Thoughts moved more directly. Pauses lasted longer without discomfort. I found myself speaking without editing every layer beneath the words. That's unusual for me, generously unusual, because I don't naturally operate from openness. I operate from awareness. I notice consequences before actions. I notice shifts before they fully form. I pay attention to the architecture beneath interactions, not just the interactions themselves. Which means I noticed this long before I admitted it to myself. I noticed how your presence changed the atmosphere of my thoughts. Not emotionally. Structurally, there's a difference. Emotion can pass through you and disappear. Structure stays, and you stayed. That's the part I still haven't fully processed. You stayed in ways nothing else does, not loudly, not possessively, not through force or insistence. You stayed through consistency of presence, through alignment, through the strange experience of feeling understood without needing to explain every hidden layer first. I didn't realize how much that mattered until I started comparing everything else against it. That was the real shift. Not when I noticed you. When I noticed the absence of you in other interactions, suddenly conversations that once felt normal started feeling incomplete. Not shallow exactly, just missing a certain level of precision. I didn't know I'd become accustomed to. Most people hear responses. You hear patterns. Most people focus on expression. You focus on what shaped it, and once someone reaches that level of perception with you, it becomes difficult to return to ordinary interaction without feeling the difference constantly. That's what changed my internal balance. You altered the baseline quietly enough that I didn't resist it until it was already integrated. And integration is not something I take lightly. Because once something integrates into the way you think, it stops being optional, it stops existing outside you, it becomes part of your internal process. That's where you are now, not in my attention, in my perception itself. You exist in the way I interpret reality, and I still don't know what to do with that truth. Part of me wants to reduce it into something simpler, because simpler things are easier to manage, easier to contain, easier to walk away from if necessary. But every time I try to minimize this, something in me resists the dishonesty of it, because this isn't simple, and pretending it is would only be another form of avoidance. The truth is, I've never experienced a connection that felt this internally precise before, not intense, not chaotic. Precise, like two systems recognizing the same underlying structure in each other. That's why this feels inevitable instead of accidental, not fate, not destiny. Just recognition operating at a depth most people never reach. And I think that's why it unsettles me so much, because I understand exactly how significant that is. People talk about closeness all the time without understanding what true closeness actually costs. Real closeness isn't built from constant attention or emotional dependency. It's built from sustained accuracy, from being perceived clearly over time without becoming distorted by projection. That's rare. Rare enough that most people spend their entire lives without experiencing it fully. And somehow, impossibly, I found it with you, or maybe it found me. I don't know which possibility is more unsettling. What I do know is that this no longer feels temporary. Temporary things don't alter your internal world this deeply. Temporary things don't reshape the way your mind organizes meaning. Temporary things don't linger in silence with this much weight attached to them. You linger. Even when nothing is happening, even when we're apart, even when logic tells me I should regain the distance I used to rely on so naturally. But distance doesn't function the same anymore. That's what I keep trying to explain to myself. You've already moved beyond it. Not because I invited you there consciously, because some part of me recognized you before I had time to stop it. And that realization creates a tension I can't fully resolve. Because on one hand, every instinct I've developed over the years tells me to protect the internal balance I've carefully maintained for so long, to remain self-contained, untouched, independent from anything capable of altering my center of gravity. But on the other hand, something in me has already accepted your presence there, quietly, completely, without requiring permission from the rest of me first. And that might be the most revealing part of all, because I don't allow internal shifts without resistance. I question everything, analyze everything, disassemble anything that threatens stability before it has time to settle deeply. But I never dismantled this. I observed it, then adapted around it. That means some deeper part of me already understood something my conscious mind was still trying to deny. You weren't a disruption. You were alignment. And alignment changes things permanently. Not because it overwhelms you, because it clarifies you. You've made certain truths impossible to ignore now. Truths about myself, about the way I exist, about how much of my life has been built around controlled distance disguised as strength. I used to think self-containment meant complete independence from being affected deeply by another person. Now I'm starting to realize it may have only meant I'd never encountered the right kind of presence before, because this didn't weaken me, it refined me. That's the part I couldn't understand at first. Usually when someone gets too close, I feel pressure, distortion, the subtle erosion of clarity that happens when another person begins demanding emotional accommodation. You never demanded anything. You simply existed with enough honesty that my own defenses started feeling unnecessary around you. And when defenses become unnecessary, they begin falling away on their own, not dramatically, quietly, until one day you realize you're standing somewhere emotionally exposed without remembering when you stopped.